find a dam of interest, and you can look up information about that particular dam. Excuse me just a second. All right, sorry about that. And then let's look a little bit at the rating of the national infrastructure. This course that we started back in 2002, the 2-day course, was a result of ASCE's request for some seminars on failing infrastructure across the United States. One of the things that I have done over the years is to keep track of the ASCE report card since 1988. And so, sorry. So what you can see here are all the various different categories that we have for the national infrastructure and the grades that have been given over the years for this particular, for each category. And as you can see, dams throughout the years have pretty much maintained a D average, which isn't good. And so it became a concern for our staff here at Walter P. Moore to try and get that message out. And so we got involved in providing these seminars across the United States to try and get engineers and perhaps, if we could, their clients, and then there were some people in the insurance industry to understand what the risks were related to dams. So there are several issues that face dams. According to the Association of Dam Safety Officials, the top issues that are facing dams in our community or facing the dam safety community are, first of all, the risk of failure. There are currently over 1,680 dams across the United States, which are considered unsafe due to some significant deficiency, and these are located in nearly every state. Next, there is the increasing hazard. A high hazard dam indicates that there would likely be loss of life or substantial damage to property in the downstream reaches in the event of a failure. There are currently over 15,000 high hazard dams in the United States, which is up from 9,900 in 2006. The increasing number of high hazard dams is not due to an increase in the number of high hazard dams that are being built, but rather has to do with the increasing development downstream of existing dams. Texas and North Carolina, just those two states, account for over 1/6 of all the nation's high hazard dams. I'm going to talk a little bit, just mention briefly the financing and for maintenance and upgrade and repair. 63% of all dams in the US are privately owned. So if you think about that, that's probably dams that are owned by farmers or by dams that are owned by homeowners associations. And the financial resources of these private owners are somewhat limited for most of those dams. So that's a concern. I'm going to skip down over aging dams and the lack of adequate authority just for a minute. We'll show those on the next couple of slides, but skip down to lack of emergency preparedness in the case of failure. Only 61% of all high hazard and significant hazard dams across the US have emergency action plans. So what we're saying is that somewhere close to 40% of the dams, if they were to fail, dam owners and local authorities would be unprepared to respond to the sudden release of water. And then next is the lack of public awareness. Developers build in downstream dam break inundation areas, not knowing the potential risk, sometimes even unaware that there's a dam upstream of them. And then citizens, while they may be aware of a dam, will tend to be overly confident in the infallibility of the structure, putting themselves at risk by living in these flood-prone areas. So turning back a little bit just to the two categories that I skipped over, aging dams, just to kind of give you an idea. As of 2018, some of the statistics were that what we found is many of the dams designed have an effective design life of about 50 years. So I should say this NID statistic's been upgraded to 2020, but it's estimated that as of 2020, approximately 63 of all dams in the US were older than 50 years already. And by 2030, that number is going to jump to 81%. And then finally, on that list of issues, if we look at the lack of adequate authority and resources, and I just take Texas as an example here on the page, we see that we have over 7,000 dams in the state, of which 4,000 or so are regulated by TCEQ. There's 1,400 high hazard dams, and approximately 800 of those are deficient in some form or other. The good news is that we're higher than the national average in terms of those high hazard dams that have an EAP, or an emergency action plan, at 80%. But what we find is that most states have legislative authority to carry out a dam safety program, but some states have limited ability to enforce the law, and officials have no recourse if a dam owner fails to respond to state-ordered repairs. And on top of that, all but one state, that state being California, all but one state are underfunded and understaffed to administer a state's dam safety program effectively. You can see here in Texas that we have a budget of roughly about $417 per dam in the state, and that's just the ones that are regulated. We have also have a number of dams that each full-time equivalent staff at TCEQ has responsibility for, averages out to be about 149. FEMA recommends that at least that number come down to about 25 per full-time employee. One state, Alabama, has no budget for dam safety whatsoever. And so that kind of gives you sort of the background of where we are in terms of that report card and the statistics that are following. So let's turn our eyes to responsibility and liability. The probable source of current thinking regarding the liability for dam safety is English common law. That holds that the capture or collection of large amounts of water on one's land constitutes a hazardous activity, and that the collector operates at the risk of all subsequent occurrences related to the capture. This may come as a shock to some dam owners, such as homeowners associations, who probably inherit an amenity lake from a developer. And while proper operation and maintenance may be only one aspect of the owner's activities, safely maintaining a dam is a key element in prevention of a failure and limiting the liability of the owner. So when assessing liability, should a dam failure occur or an incident occur, the standard of care exercised by the owner is going to be closely examined. So ultimately, the responsibility for maintaining a safe dam rests with the owner. I put this in here just because I think it reads really strangely. The National Dam Safety Act Dam Safety Program Act of 1996 reads this: nothing in this act or no action or failure to act under this act shall create any liability in the United States or its officers or employees for the recovery of damages caused by such action or failure to act. And then secondly, relieve an owner or operator of a dam of the legal responsibilities, legal duties, obligations, and liabilities incident to the ownership or operation of the dam. So what is this saying? The federal government is basically saying that we're not responsible. So again, they're sort of reinforcing this idea that the liability and responsibility comes back to the dam owner. Well, is dam insurance something that an owner could acquire? Dam insurance is available for dams that are owned by state and local governments, and that is sort of insured using the financial resources of the government itself. It's also available to privately owned dams. Available for privately owned dams used for revenue generation, such as those for hydroelectric power. Owners and operators have resources to pay for insurance through revenue generation activities, but they also have an incentive to maintain coverage to protect their investment and to minimize business disruption losses. But it's not available, insurance is not available or readily attainable for the small dam owner. Primary barrier is the lack of credible probability assessments to determine the risk of loss. So insurers are reluctant to cover risks that cannot be assessed with a reasonable degree of predictability, and this leads the insurers basing premiums on the worst case scenarios, making insurance not affordable for the small dam owner. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but these are the four legislative acts that have occurred regarding dam safety at the national level. What's interesting to note is that each one of these is really sort of a response to dam failures or dam incidents or potential dam incidents that could have occurred or that did occur over the time period. So if you look at 1972, well, 1963 to 1972, there were several dam failures across the U.S., including the Baldwin Hills Dam in California and the Buffalo Creek Tailings Dam in West Virginia. Then you have the executive order in 1979 that was preceded by 1976 and 1977, when there were several other very well-known failures, including the Teton Dam in Idaho and the Kelly Barnes Dam in Georgia. Then in 1994, we had 84 dams failing in Georgia, southwest Georgia, due to Tropical Storm Alberto. And then in 1996, we have the National Dam Safety Act. And then finally in 2001, we had 9/11, which resulted in the Dam Safety and Security Act. Now, each one of those established different sort of governing authorities with respect to dam safety. So we've got the implementation of a dam inspection requirement for the Corps of Engineers, and then the development of the inventory that we saw earlier. We have FEMA that is now coordinating federal efforts for dam safety. We've got the development of policies and procedures related to dams, and then finally enhancing the 1996 Act to safeguard against terrorist acts. Now, in talking about regulations, dam safety regulations in Texas are governed by the Texas Administrative Code, Title 30, Part 1, Chapter 299. Now, these regulations will vary from state to state, and some of those acts that we looked at on the previous slide dictated that the state is responsible for setting up dam safety programs. And so while you're not going to see that regulations are the same from state to state, because there is no national regulation, FEMA's providing training, resources, and guidance, what you will see is there's some very similar aspects to all of the regulations from state to state. And so Texas has its own, it's in Chapter 299. That's where you find really all of the details about the dam safety program there. The TCEQ also maintains an inventory of all dams in Texas that are currently under their jurisdiction. We noted earlier that there are 7,300 dams or so in Texas, but only 4,000 that fall under TCEQ regulations. In 2011, legislation was enacted by the state that exempted a significant number of dams from TCEQ regulations. Basically, reservoirs that impound less than 500 acre feet and that are classified as a low or significant hazard, that are located in a county where there's less than 350,000 people, and they're located outside of the city limits of a municipality, are now exempt. So you meet those criteria, you're exempt. As you can see from this map, there are really only 13 counties in Texas that have populations of greater than 350,000 people. So for the most part, dams outside that are a lower significant hazard and outside of a municipality are not going to fall under TCEQ jurisdiction. We were recently working with a dam owner in an unincorporated part of one of the counties in East Texas who met all of this criteria, but his dam was located a couple hundred feet upstream of a major population center in the unincorporated portion of the county. Halfway through our work with him, the 2011 legislation was enacted, and we really haven't heard from him since. So this is kind of the way things sort of play out. There is there is criteria and hazard identification guidelines for the state of Texas, and several all the states generally have this, perhaps with the exception of the one notable exception that I made earlier, where the state does not have any dam safety criteria. But criteria is based on size and hazard classification. These are used to determine the design flood and, in some cases, freeboard, depending on which state you're in. Oh, I should also say that it identifies, you can see this gray hatched area. These are areas, these are dams of this size, which are excluded from Texas dam safety regulations. So this chart is really helpful in determining where we fall in terms of the regulations. Now, if we talk about the classifications of dams, as I said, it falls under, we have size classifications and we have hazard classifications. So typically in Texas, a large dam is considered one that either is greater than 50,000 acre feet of impoundment or greater than 100 feet in height. A small dam is less than 1,000 acre feet in height, less than 1,000 acre feet in storage, and less than 40 acre feet, 40 feet in height. And then their intermediate dam would be all those dams that are in between. Hazard classification, most people, when they hear high hazard dam, they think that a dam is about to fail. That's not really what we're saying. What we're saying is if it were to fail, there would be expected loss of life and excessive economic loss. A significant hazard would really shift the gears to sort of a possible loss of life, but not expected, and an appreciable economic loss. And then a low hazard, no loss of life expected and minimal economic losses. Sometimes the loss may only be the dam itself. So these two factors figure into figuring out, to calculating what the design flood is going to be. And the design flood, which as I mentioned is sometimes called the spillway design flood or the inflow design flood, is the flood which must be safely passed through the outlet structure and emergency spillway without overtopping the dam structure itself. So in Texas, we have a diagram, a table that looks something like this, that if you, it sets apart the hazard classification and the size classification so that you can read off and determine which design flood, which minimum design flood you are going to have to pass. There are a few exemptions. If you can show no adverse impact to downstream areas through a breach analysis, then you may be able to pass a smaller storm. But more than likely, your spillway is going to have to be designed for one of these flood events. So if I had a significant hazard dam that was, say, 25 feet in height, which would be a small dam, I would have to pass 50% of the PMF, or the probable maximum flood. Well, what is the probable maximum flood? That's the flood that is caused by a rainfall produced, in layman's terms, by the worst possible combination of climatic events. It works out to be about a rainfall event of 50 inches in 72 hours in the DFW area. It's higher in the Houston area. And just to kind of give you a relative understanding, Harvey reached about 95% of the associated probable maximum precipitation in the Clear Lake area. Beaumont was above 100%. So if you thought that we can't reach 100% or a full probable maximum precipitation or probable maximum flood, we actually can. And it looks like if Beaumont exceeded 100%, that we might have to revisit those statistics in the near future. But these are the magnitudes of events that we're looking at. And if you're trying to get a ballpark estimate, a PMF flood, a probable maximum flood, is roughly about 5 times a 100-year flood event. So that'll kind of give you a sort of a range of what we're talking about here. So I just want to kind of walk you through a real quick exercise that I normally do with my class. And if I look at the statistics that I have here, or the data that I have here on my slide, and I talk about the description of the dam, what I find is I've got a 19-foot dam that can impound at its maximum elevation 939 acre feet. Well, because there's a county road bridge and a barn within 1 mile, it's probably classified as a small dam. It's in a rural area. So it would be a small dam with a low hazard classification. based on that table I just showed you, that would turn out to be about a 25% probable maximum flood. Now here's the issue. A developer comes in and subdivides a 100-acre tract located downstream into 5-acre lots. 7 of these have a serene view overlooking a small stream, and the houses to be built are located at the outside edge of the regulatory 100-year floodplain, which has been significantly reduced as a result of the dam. So the question becomes, well, what changes do I have to account for in terms of hazard classification, size classification, and the design flood that I'm going to have to pass? If we look at it, well, the dam doesn't really change. So it's still classified as a small dam. But what has happened is that the downstream condition has changed, and we have substantial residential areas that are now at risk, creating a high hazard classification. So that turns into going from a 25% probable maximum flood to 75% probable maximum flood. So now we've got 3 times as much flow that we're going to have to pass through our spillway. In a lot of cases, that can't happen. So what do we do if the design flood can't be passed? Well, the first thing that we look at is the retrofit of the dam and spillway to make sure that it can pass that. There is an alternative, an exemption that I mentioned earlier, that you can perform a breach analysis to demonstrate that there are no adverse impacts in order to qualify for an exemption. But that doesn't always happen, and so you are left with the idea that you may have to retrofit the dam and spillway, and in some cases, it may be more beneficial just to remove the dam altogether. So with that background, let's talk a little bit about the issues that we see out at dams when we do inspections, looking for deficiencies in the dam, looking for issues that may need to be maintained at a higher level so that we don't lose the dam in the near future. So I'm going to walk through several inspection issues and how we might do an inspection. I've got several pictures. This is sort of my exercise number 2. Because I think the best way to tell the story is with pictures. But the things that we're looking for are structural inspection issues. Those deal with the integrity of the dam itself. We have geotechnical issues, and these are primarily foundational and seepage issues. And then finally, the outlet works, and these focus on the operational issues of the dam, both at low flow and at high flow conditions. So where do we begin? Well, part of the inspection process is sure there's inspection process that looks at records from previous inspections, or even just looking at where the dam is located, what is the condition and the surroundings that it sits in. A lot of that can be done from a desktop, but we really have to get out there and walk the dam to figure out where are the issues that are hiding that we can't really see. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is walk the crest of the dam and look for things that we might see out there. Are there longitudinal cracks in the dam? Are there transverse cracks that are due to erosion that are now potentially going to cause the ability for water to pass over the top of the dam before it actually gets to the top of the dam? Are there depressions in the top of the dam? Things like that. So with that in mind, if we look at a few pictures, one of the things that helps is to sight along a linearity. In this dam, which is in Central Texas, there's a roadway going across the top of the dam. It's what we would call a farm to market road or a ranch road. And what you will notice in this center of the picture right here, there appears to be some guardrail misalignment. So the question is the dam moving, or is this just something unrelated? So if the dam is moving, that's going to be something of consideration. Either way, we would want to document this and just provide this as a record for what may be happening in the future. And you may want to keep this under observation over the next couple of months and years, just to make sure that it's not moving forward even further. One of the things I found as I went and looked at this area was sort of a mystery hole, which is right here. It could be an animal burrow. which I didn't stick my foot down there to see or stick my hand in to see. It was fairly deep, but it also could be a realignment of the guardrail. This is in the it's very close to the area where that a misalignment of the guardrail was. And so it could be that there was an accident or something, that the post was broken, who knows? And so the guardrail was reset at a new location that appeared to give us this misalignment in the guardrail. Then we get this, what I call it alligator cracking on the surface of the roadway. The question becomes, is this just poor subgrade material underneath the roadway, or is the dam material itself starting to separate and we're getting sort of a sloughing effect that's happening over a long period of time as a result of the dam materials working against each other? These are all things that we would note as we're out there in the doing the inspection. Now, this is a picture of what we call, sometimes it's called beaching, sometimes it's called benching. It's a result of wind run up on the upstream side of the dam. So you see here, there's the lake on this side. You get strong winds that are blowing and pushing waves up on the side of the dam. And if you were to look underneath this vegetation, you would see that it's sort of stair-stepped as it goes down. You can kind of see it right here. It's kind of flattens out, and then it steps down underneath the water, and there's material here. And what ends up happening is that the waves crash against the upstream end of the embankment, and it washes some of the material and sediment down, and it settles just below the water surface. And so you get this sort of erosive effect. And if that continues, there's a risk of the dam's integrity. So you want to make sure that you make a note of something like that, as it could pose a substantial risk. This was kind of an interesting dam. We found in here a sanitary sewer running longitudinally along the dam axis, probably not the best place for utilities or sewer systems, but it was running actually this direction all the way through the dam and across the spillway a little bit downstream of the crest. So things to note that could potentially be risks to either internal erosion, piping, some sort of incident that could occur. Next, as we do continue on this inspection, we want to look at the slopes and the toe of the dam. Some of the things that can occur are heavy vegetation. Heavy vegetation can hinder the view of what's going on. Maybe you have a slide here or a slough in another place. So we want to pay close attention, walk back and forth across the slope of the dam to determine if there are any deficiencies there. This is that same dam with the road going across it. There is no vegetation on the downstream side of the dam, which is where we are. The TCEQ had recommended the removal of trees from the dam, but what we see is that there's the potential for erosion because there's absolutely no vegetation there right now. So when TCEQ made that request that they remove all the trees from the dam, these were all juniper trees and they were all cut off at the base. So the stumps were left behind. This is usually not a good idea. Tree roots are going to rot, and they're going to create the potential for piping along vacated tunnels in the dam. The TCEQ did indicate that junipers will not rot that quickly, but there is a need for a long-term fix on this dam. So we recommended the removal of the root balls and then backfilling with good backfill material. We were able to get some information from the state of New Mexico on how best to treat this sort of situation. This actually, believe it or not, is a dam. It slopes like this. I'm standing in what is a power corridor that's going along the dam. You see there's a telephone pole there with some lines running across this gap. But this is the slope of the dam, and there is so much vegetation here on the downstream face that it's really hard to tell even that it is a dam, let alone whether or not there are deficiencies on the downstream face. We also have issues with animals. Sorry, I got this photograph or meme, if you will, from a colleague in Ohio and works for the state of Ohio. But We do have issues with animals, with burrowing animals. We have issues with fire ants, at least in Texas we do. Livestock traffic, all of this can lead to piping potential. If you think of the burrowing animals going in and then all of a sudden they come into contact with, they've created a den or a hole in the dam face, and that hole or tunnel comes into contact with the phreatic surface within the dam, then we're going to start to see a piping situation. Or if we've got livestock traveling on the dam, there's the potential for erosion of the dam surface itself. Then we look at spillway and outlet works. All of these are critical to the ability for the water to pass not only the design storm, but the regular flows that are occurring within the dam. There are many different types of overflow structures or outlet works. And so you have to keep in mind what you're looking at in terms of the structural ability and the hydrologic ability for it to pass the flow that it needs to. This is the upstream or head wall on an intake, and it's starting to separate, as you can see right here. One of my colleagues took a stick and ran it down this crack and found no rebar. So there was an inch-wide gap here with no rebar tying the wall together. So there was the risk that this was generally going to fall into, it's dry at this time, but there is a lake on this side. It will fall into the lake and create a situation where the intake of the outlet structure was not operable. Here is actually the downstream side of that same structure. And what we'll note here is that in this primary outlet structure, erosion and undermining of the toe slab is starting to occur, which is going to need repair before this cracks and breaks and falls in, and then creates another situation. And then looking downstream from that same structure, we see the spillway chute, and it is narrowing and it is starting to be choked with vegetation as it narrows, and that can create a situation in which you get backwater up into the outlet structure, and then the structure is not working as efficiently as it was originally designed. This is what was called a rubble spillway. It was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It is, in this photograph, under flow from 7 inches of rain that occurred in about 12 hours the night before. And significant debris was in the spillway to the left of the photo. That's just off camera, you can't see it. But erosion was occurring due to the water from the storm. Not seen this much water in quite a while. And so to describe the rubble spillway, it is sort of a series of cribs or cradles that were made of timber, that then were backfilled with cement and rock and mud. And this dam, after this storm, this dam went several years without a fix, primarily due to its placement on the historical registry. And once something gets on the historical registry, it's very difficult to get it restored back to a working order. So anyway, just things to know about, but this was an interesting spillway I had not seen before, and you're starting to see the erosion just from the massive amount of water that was coming over the spillway. And then this is actually an active failure that we filmed a couple of years ago. There was no emergency action plan for this particular dam, and it was releasing water on a sunny day. With the assistance of the nearby City Public Works Department, a cofferdam was quickly erected around the hole in the dam, which prevented a total collapse of the dam. Looking next at the abutments of the dam, which is the area where the dam itself ties into natural ground. There is a potential for erosion that can occur on this area, what we call the groin, where the interface occurs. We also want to look for any kind of seepage that might show up as an improper contact or improper tie-in with the abutment. So again, back to this dam in Central Texas, what we see here is a large drainage area being funneled toward the abutment on the downstream side of the dam. So the downstream side of the dam is here, the lake side is over here, and we're seeing all of this drainage come down, and there's a potential for eroding the toe of the dam as it comes down toward the camera. Looking the opposite direction, of the same dam, what we see is another area where water is being channeled down the toe of the dam. There was an emergency spillway. It's interesting. I showed you the 5 or so pipes that were at the principal spillway, and I think there were 48-inch arch pipes. And the emergency spillway on this dam was only 2 18-inch CMPs, and they came underneath the road and then were routed the drainage down the toe of the dam due to limited space. There's a wastewater settling basin on the right-hand side, and so they had to make this immediate 90-degree turn and bring it down. So without the vegetation, there is the potential for more erosion that's going to occur. And then finally, looking at the downstream area, we want to look for areas of potential seepage, anything that might be telling us that water's not traveling in the direction we had intended it to go in its original design. Here's an example. This is lush vegetation at the toe of the dam. There are cattails. Foundation seepage from the dam is a possibility, but it's also the possibility that we could have leaching from that wastewater settling basin that I just mentioned. So what we did was recommend a coliform test to determine whether or not the source of the water was contaminated. And if it was likely the settling basin. If not, then we had to ask ourselves whether or not there is foundation seepage coming underneath the dam from the lake. This was a recent dam that we were looking at. There was a boil or a spring at the toe of a chute spillway. The water was seeping into concrete joints. As you can see, it's coming down on the right-hand side and just sort of disappearing into these joints, and it's showing up on the downstream side, indicating that there's a pathway underneath the slab of the spillway itself. This could become critical if things are left unmaintained or unrepaired. So that generally covers the topics I wanted to talk about today, and it'll leave us about 10 minutes to discuss. Any questions y'all might have? Hopefully, as a result of the class, you can now perhaps identify who is liable for the safety of the dam. Short answer is it's the owner. You can define a hazard classification of a dam. It really has to do with what's going on downstream in terms of development and risk to human life and property. And then finally, to recognize the deficiencies and potential threats to dam safety. So hopefully looking through some of those photos in that exercise, you can kind of come away with some of the potential problems that might be in existence at any given dam that you walk out to. So with that, I will turn it back. I believe I'm turning it over to Mike for question and answer. And just briefly, this animation here is we put together an analysis of the historic Johnstown flood when the South Fork Dam broke in 1889 and flooded the city of Johnstown at the downstream end you see on the left. So, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Andy. I don't see any questions coming in quite yet. Just a reminder, please type those either into the Q&A or the chat boxes. All right, we've got our first question here. Large dams tend to interfere with the rock arrangement of the bed area. Does that count as a potential hazard?
Yeah, it can. I think that's what we saw in the Teton Dam failure in 1976. I don't know if you've seen some of the documentaries that have been done on the History Channel or on the Discovery Channel, but they as they excavated out the key trench for the toe to tie in the dam at Teton, they found fissures and cracks that were occurring in the foundation there, where they were going to tie in the abutments. And I believe the statement was that they had used up in filling the fractures in the hole. Filling the fractures in the foundation, they used as much grout as they had planned on using for the entire project. And then, of course, obviously, it didn't fare well, because that's probably the failure mechanism that occurred with Teton, is that water was able to seep into the abutment on the right-hand side looking downstream, and make its way around through whatever grout they had in there, make its way around the abutment of the dam, and then it started to erode away the face of the dam. And then within a 4-hour period, the entire 200-foot or so depth of water eroded the dam completely down. The remains of the dam are still there, but the dam itself was never rebuilt. So yeah, I do think that is an issue.
All right. And then we've got another one that is asking, who is responsible for signing a dam certification document? And what's the liability of a design engineer in the event of a dam breach?
That's also a great question. Okay, certification of a dam, I guess, in terms of certifying that the dam has been designed correctly, is going to be the professional engineer. There are a number of forms that TCEQ has on their website that whenever you are building a dam, you're going to have to fill out those forms to provide to them. And it's really deals with the pertinent design aspects of the dam in terms of its size and what type of spillway it has, what type of design flood you looked at, how high that water is expected to get relative to the top of the dam. All of those things are part of that form, and it is usually signed by the professional engineer. And the dam owner has some signatory responsibility there as well, but primarily it's filled out by the engineer and accompanies his report, his or her report. Can you repeat the second part of that question?
Yeah, the second part was, what's the liability of a design engineer in the event of a dam breach?
Yeah, another great question. Let's put it this way. If a dam fails, the first person who's going to be called onto the carpet, so to speak, is going to be the owner. But then he's going to turn around and look to the dam engineer, the engineer who either A, did the original design or did the most recent inspection. So the way I understand it is that, because I'm not a lawyer, but from a legal standpoint, as much as I understand, those involved with the ownership of the dam and the design of the dam are going to be looked at in terms of standard of care. So did the design engineer exercise the proper standard of care in the design of the dam? Did he meet all of the minimum requirements for the dam? Those are going to be inspected heavily, but that's where you rely, is to look on whether or not those standards had been met. Then looking at the owner's responsibility, I know not necessarily part of the question, but maybe helps the engineer communicate better with his client, is that the next thing that the opposing side would look at after they look at the standard of care of design would be the standard of care with respect to maintenance and operations. So were there deficiencies noted in any inspection? Were those taken care of? How often is the maintenance and operation plan followed? There needs to be a regular maintenance and operation plan in place, and have those things been adhered to. So that hopefully that answered the question. There is some responsibility, but generally falls back to standard of care.
Thank you for that answer. I think we have time for one or two more, and then we've got to wrap things up. The next question is the PMF still based on data from the 1940s? Do you have any thoughts about going to NOAA Atlas 14?
Yeah, so the difficulty is that NOAA Atlas 14 doesn't really give you the PMF. Now, maybe you could extrapolate some of the data there. I'm not sure, but I will say that in Texas, we no longer rely on the data from the PMF. I believe was actually the first report that came out was HMR 51 and 52, and that came out in the early 1980s. There may have been some predecessors in the late 70s, but that was how the PMF was originally determined. In about, I think it was 2016, which preceded Harvey, for those of you in the Houston, Beaumont area. There was a report that was done. It was funded by the state. It was done by a group out of, I believe it was Colorado, and their name is escaping me at the moment, but they actually did a new analysis on what the probable maximum precipitation would be. And then along with that, Friesen Nichols has done a great job of providing guidance, H&H guidance for TCEQ and for those users of how you translate the probable maximum precipitation to a probable maximum flood. So there have been some updated studies as recently as 2016. There probably needs to be, like I said, since Harvey and Beaumont exceeded that probable maximum precipitation, we may have to look at that again. But there is data that is at least much more up to date than the early 1980s.
All right, thank you very much. And then we got one last quick one, and I see a few more questions in here, so don't worry, everybody. I will email these to Andy and we'll get you answers offline. Last question. Do you know if there are any dams located at or near active faults here in Texas?
I don't know of any specific ones. It would not surprise me. How's that? That's a quick and short answer.
Sounds perfect.
I would think that probably TCEQ or one of the river authorities would be the best to ask that question to.